Hello and welcome to Lard TV, where we are back in the workshop for a build project. One of the things I've been looking at over the years is using MDF buildings for all sorts of things, and I've always found that there's the good, the bad and the ugly when it comes to buildings available off the peg. One of the ranges that I've been really impressed by is a company called Dark Ops. So I've been impressed by them. The quality of one of the shops, a Normandy French shop that I built last year, was absolutely first class, to the extent that when people see it, they think it's a resin model on the table rather than MDF. And for some time I've been looking at doing some additional buildings. One of the things I find with my French village is it's fine for shops and houses, but I'm looking to introduce a bit of light industry and buildings that could maybe multi-purpose, maybe something that could be a blacksmith, maybe something that could be a building as part of a railway complex, so a warehouse or something like that. So the model that I've got today is Black Ops. It's 28mm range, and they call it a Blacksmiths. And I thought what we could do would be to unpackage this, and over a series of articles build it, and then look at building a yard around it, because one of the things I'm really keen to do with my buildings is extend them out so they cover a more realistic area of ground. I guess it's the same situation if you live in a house anywhere in the world. You'll find that that house doesn't just exist on its own. You tend to have a plot of land with it, be it large or small, and maybe some kind of outbuildings in there. So it's always more interesting with a tactical game when the table looks like an area that isn't just a house plonked into a huge open field, but to have something around there. So I was very keen to do some kind of yard to go with this, but also being aware of the fact that it's got to look busy, but it's also got to be practical so that you can put figures on it and place it, because there's no point in having it jammed full of skips and containers or whatever, which means there's no room for figures. So anyway, thought it might be a good idea to go through this, open this up, have a look at what we've got, and then look at building it over, as I say, over a series of short build programs, and then look at how we develop that with a yard and other walling and so on and so forth. So let's crack on and have a look at what we've got in the packet. Okay, well here it is. I'm just going to use a knife to open up the packaging, and we'll see what we've got. One of the things I was impressed with the last model that I built from these guys was actually how robust the MDF was, and this looks to me like it's 3mm MDF, which I always prefer over 2mm. So I'm just going to lay the bits out and see what we've got. Well, the first thing that I'm struck with is the level of detail that we've got here. These are really nicely etched, and this is internal floorboards. And it says something, I think, when you are looking at a model whereby it's not just the external details that are there, but you've got the internal details as well. These roofs look to be nicely detailed again with the tiling. And what we got here, I don't know, it's all falling apart on me at this stage, but we've got bits that are obviously the sort of gable end parts of the building, as well as the main walls. These two appear to be loose, but as does this one here. Okay, right, so what I'm going to do is have a look at these and see how we're going to assemble it. Now it looks to me pretty obviously as though this is going to be the base, the ground base, and then these are the walls. So yeah, we can see it's the ground base that's 3mm, some of the walls are 2mm, and it seems pretty clear how this is going to go. So let's start putting it together. All I'm using for this is the happy old jug of PVA, which I just slap onto a little plate here. I'm going to be putting that on with a bit of a rough old brush. This is the one I'm using, and I've just used the top of a can of Humbrol to put some water, Humbrol spray paint, to put some water in. So let's have a dabble with this and see where we go with regards to putting it together. Well, the first thing I really ought to point out is that with any model of this type, the best way to do this is always going to be to have a dry run through before you start gluing anything. It is pretty obvious what goes where with this, but what isn't going to be obvious, and I know this from the last model that I made, if you haven't made one of their models before, what's not going to be clear are things like the importance of doors, because these models have movable doors, and the best way to deal with them is to put them in place before you add anything else. This is all pretty blooming obvious actually, which is quite nice. I do like kits that are designed to be obvious in terms of the way they go together. Right, so that clearly goes there, that clearly goes there. And we can see there's a hole here, which is the hole where the door is going to fit into the floor. And then this is there. And I am guessing that we're going to have a similar thing with the large doors, but I don't know. Let's just have a look at the large doors, see how they work. Right, well they clearly go there, and there's clearly some arrangement whereby we're going to have something or other that holds them in place. So I'm going to check that out before I make any decisions. And we can see here that this door is going to fit in there. So you've got the top and bottom, that's going to be allow it to open and close. Now I think what I'm going to do, based on what I've seen so far, is just go ahead and stick all this together as it is. And if I'm making an error, well, that's something that will come out in the wash. No, let's stick that together. One of the things you might have noticed when we unpack this is there's quite a lot of sprues, for want of a better word, with an awful lot of bits and pieces. So the first thing I've done is I've actually gone through there and broken things out. These bits here are quite clearly, and if you look on the illustration here, on the packaging, you can see, I've just chucked a load of water on that, which doesn't help, but you can see that you've got these areas here which are for stone on the edges of the building, and you've got areas of stone which go, for example, this piece here, which will really nicely go around that door. Now that adds a lot of detail and gives it a real three-dimensional feel. But of course it does mean you've got loads of sprues and bits and pieces. So the first thing I've done is broken all these bits out and put them into just a couple of big piles. So these are all the stony bits, which I put in one pile. Then we go through, these are the doors, which will pop over there. These are just some offcuts. The thing about offcuts is never throw them away. You get lots of them that are sort of this shape, a sort of little brick block, which you can use when you want to build rubble. So I just keep these and throw them in a box. But you can see here, you've got wooden window frames, door frames. And as I go through this, I'm going to break these out from the sprues. So there's another door frame there. Just push that out with your thumb. If need be, you can always get a cocktail stick or something like that. And then just go through this, and once you break it down, there's a few bits in there which are clearly important as they've been stuck in with that, so I'm going to put that to one side. But once you break this down and just clear everything out of these sprues, you can just chuck them to one side, and then it becomes a lot clearer what you've got to work with and what you don't want to work with and what you can just chuck in the bin. because there aren't a million pieces here, but they look an awful lot when they're on the sprues. So for example, the other thing I've done is these bits are all clearly roofed, so I've put them to one side in the big roof pile. So what I'm trying to do there is just get things simple, because there are no instructions with this. I have noticed that there's actually a video on how to make this online, but I really don't have the patience to go there and do that. So I'm just going to make this myself, because really one of the things I don't want to do is necessarily stick to the way they say I've got to build it, because I'm trying to think about ways of making this look a bit different. So nevertheless, that's where we are now, and what I'm going to do is have a look through this and see what works where. So this door frame, for example, is going to go there, but I think it's going to, as we talked before, it's going to be important to fit this door in there, so that can be held in place there, and there's obviously going to be a retaining thing at the back which is going to allow that door to open and close. So I'm going to try and work out what's what for that, and then get that all put together. Okay, well, I've been looking at these doors, and what we've got on them is a couple of little lugs which I believe are going to be used to hang these doors on a kind of hinge arrangement, which, looking through them, I think there's got to be these little circular holes with pegs on. So I'm going to pop them out and just see how that happens, see how that works. So obviously what you don't want to do is stick the doors, because the doors are meant to be moving, so we'll just put the glue on the hinges. Now, how tricky is this going to be? Probably very tricky looking at it, but let's give it a go and see what happens. The other thing we've got to be aware of is we want to make sure that these pegs are flush with the door, because you're going to have wall detail around that. So I'm just popping that in there with PVA, and I think what I'm going to do is just put the two top ones in first and let them dry, because once that's done, then I think what I need to do is put the door in and hang the door at the same time as putting the bottom hinge on. Now, one of the reasons I'm thinking about letting that dry is that you can see here that as I'm doing this, you can't help but get PVA. Well, you probably could, but I can't help but get PVA on it. So I'm going to let that dry before I do any more and set these two to one side. So the idea is that I hang that on there, but at the same time, that should take the weight to allow me to put the other hinge on there. Slightly fiddly, but then at least then you've got doors that open, which can be quite nice. As we can see here, I've got this door in place. This frame is definitely going to be going around there and holding that in place from the front. But I think we're going to find that there's going to be another frame on the inside which does precisely the same thing. What I'm not certain at the moment is what all these frames do. So I'm not going to actually glue that in place. So I'm taking that out and setting that to one side as well. Now what I do know is that we've got a set of stairs going up here. I can see that on the rather soggy image that came with the packaging. Now I've identified these pieces here which clearly hook on there, and at the same time, when that's stuck in place, that goes in there, and that will create the risers which the stairs will then sit on. So I'm actually going to get those and stick them in place, which again looks relatively fiddly, but not the end of the world. I think once you've got the first one in, we should then be able to just pop the end in the hole there and then sit that down on there. And I'm not actually going to attach this to the base yet. I will do that when we've got a bit of wiggle room, when I've got everything in place, and then we'll just use the brush to slip that under there and then glue that down there. That will obviously be held completely rigid when we have the actual flat surface of the stairs on there. So let me have a wiggle about with that and see where we get to. Okay, well that actually was a lot easier than I thought it would be. The thing I did find out is that this top section is actually not quite as high as these ones. And for some reason this doesn't come out as a step, but clearly looking at the image, that is treated, goes on in the same way. So certainly the best way I found was to put the first one on and then place that there, and now, this will probably fall apart when I do this, I can just put my PVA glue underneath that and put that down in place. Now what I'm going to do is just put a bit of water on my brush and clean that up. And to be honest with you, I'm not too bothered because I'm going to be putting some kind of texture on this surface. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but we'll see how that runs. Now looking at this, I think we've got a top step like that. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps going down, which must be these ones here on this sheet. And this is one of the disadvantages, if we're honest, about not having any instructions, that you are having to guess, and which is one of the reasons why I'm looking at my soggy image and doing the bits that I can actually see first, because by process of elimination that will mean that we're left with something or other, and then we have to work out where the blimmin' heck that goes. But being very careful, as I've said before, with details such as around the door, because that is where we're potentially going to glue things in place and find out later that we've done it wrong. So I'm just running brush over this, and as we can see, there's a wonky edge to these steps, and 2 wonky edges and 2 straight edges. Now clearly the straight edges go there to form the point where they meet with the riser and with the wall, and the wonky edges are there to give it the look of stone, where the external edges are. So let's just get this one finished, and see where we go from there. And the weak spot here is potentially that I can't see how we support that bit of the wall, that bit of the stairs. But this is where keeping bits of offcut, which I mentioned earlier, I mean this probably isn't the right bit, but I bet it will work for me. So I just stuck that bit of offcut that I showed you in there earlier, and put that in. Just give it a quick touch up and level them off. And as you can see there, we have our stairs running up to the door. Again, I'm just going to tidy this up slightly because we don't want too much glue clocked about the place. But to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter. It dries, and you know we're going to be applying bits of plaster and whatever to this, but that's okay. So now we've got this bit here drying, we've got these bits here done. I think that's kind of it for now. Well, as I say, I do think that is probably it for now. I could start adding some detail. I mean, it does seem fairly obvious where these bits go, but the important thing that I find with any kit is to take it a stage at a time, let that dry, and certainly things like the doors are still a little bit of a mystery to me, so I'm leaving them to dry completely. while you've been away, I really have just done a couple of bits that I told you I was going to do in the last video. And actually, the thing that really surprised me was how easy doing the main doors was. Having let the first hinge at the top on each door dry, I was able then to just pop the bottom hinge over the bottom part of the door, add a bit of glue just into the far away from the hinge, the furthest point from the wall away from the hinge in there, and slot that in. And it's a really nice fit. So the little point at the end of the, it's like a lollipop basically. You've got a circle at the top, which is the hinge that the piece of wood goes in, and then what would be the handle of the lollipop comes out, and the handle of the lollipop goes into the wall there, and the hinge goes there. Well, of course, the weight of the door is supported by the top hinge, which is already dried, and it really went in without any trouble whatsoever. The other thing I did was I decided to put this door in. We talked a lot about that. I found a piece of wood that fits on the inside, put that in place, let that dry. Again, just using PVA glue. I really wouldn't recommend using any other type of glue with MDF, unless you are desperate to get an immediate contact hole when something like a super glue will work. But it's not ideal. It doesn't create the right type of bond. I don't know why PVA works so well, maybe because it's wood and you get some kind of soak in, but it really does work well. So what you then do is you just pop the door in and then do exactly the same again with the architrave around the outside, the external side, and that door is in there and it's trapped, it's sandwiched between the two architraves, internal and external, but the little pin that puts it into the top of the door frame and into the floor keeps it openable. When I'm letting that dry, I just leave the door open, just in case any glue has got around the frame, and that could cause it to stick in place. Right, so what do we do next? Well, there's several things we do next. We could start putting on the stone work that goes around the edges of the walls. We could start putting on the woodwork that goes around the windows and door frames, or we could look at the interior. I thought first of all it might be good to look at the interior and make sure we were getting that right. As I say, there are no instructions, but things are pretty obvious in this kit. So, for example, I found these two bits here, which look basically like the legs of a table. And clearly, the way they are sized is they fit very neatly into that room there. And if we then go and dry fit that and find our floor, that floor then fits perfectly in. So it's pretty obvious they go together. What's also obvious is that this piece of floor has got two holes in it. Well, why is that? Well, clearly the reason for that is that something slots in there. MDF manufacturers are not going to create slots and holes and cuts unnecessarily. When you're looking at these things trying to fathom them out, it is clear that where there are holes, there will be things to fit in it. So, looking around, I found this, which at first I thought was actually a bit of a sort of unusual bit of flooring, but actually it fits neatly there. And again, if it fits neatly, if the manufacturer is any good, they're not going to be making things that fit in two different areas. So that's there. Now, having built a kit from Dark Ops before, I remember that their loft in one of the houses used some balustrade to act as a handle for putting the floor in and out, and this is exactly that. So the first thing we can do now is start by putting that in place, and then we put our wall struts in place. And the next thing I found were these three wall struts, there'd be struts to support the ceiling. Now that has to be in another part of the building, so the simple way to do it is to go, oh look, that fits there, and fit it does. And obviously, the other thing here is, look at those, there's a nick there and a nick there. They're there for a reason. Well, when you find this one and there's a nick there and a nick there, it becomes pretty clear that when you put that in place there and that in place there, that is going to be the support for a section of flooring, first floor flooring. And funnily enough, that fits almost perfectly. So again, we're coming back to that basic rule that if there are nicks and indents, they're there for a reason. Don't ignore them. So this probably isn't going to be that interesting, but let's have a look how quickly I can make this work. So first things first, I'm going to pop the ceiling supports in where they quite obviously fit best. So 2 of them, nice and simple. And you don't need to caulk the PVA on, just keep it modest in its application. Let them dry, no point in touching them while that's happening there. Again, doing a very, very similar here, but we've worked out that this whole thing goes together, so let's fit this externally first of all. It's always nice to make a point of having the etched bits outwards. If you put that against the wall, you can see how nicely etched it is. If you put it the other way around, you won't get that benefit. So we'll pop that together and you can see that that is going to fit quite nicely. Now, if you're going to let that dry outside the model, which you can, just make sure you've got it on a level surface so all those legs are flat. Failing that, and I think I'm just going to whack this straight in, I'm going to add my PVA glue in modest amounts and then pop a bit on the foot of the forward legs and the sides where they're going to be touching, because there's no point in applying it where they're not going to be glued to anything, and just shove that in. Actually, on reflection, I would recommend doing this while it is wet because it allows you to just jiggle it about and get everything straight before the whole thing sets, because once it does set, it's going to set pretty rigidly. So you can see how that's going to go there. That's going to sit on top of that. That's going to sit on top of that with our internal wall. So what I'm going to do now is glue that internal wall in place. Nice and simple. And I'm not going to put these in until that is all dried, because I want to, I don't want that particularly, I don't want that gluing onto anything, so I'm going to keep that nice and simple. Now there are some other bits which I suspect are internal bits, but I'm not sure what they are. So at the moment I'm going through the process that I mentioned before, which is sticking on all the bits that I can work out where they go, because ultimately anything left should then fairly logically fall into place. So here, for example, it's completely obvious that this is going to serve as the detail around that door, and it's even got some nice indents which confirm that where those hinges are. So very simply pop this on. Once again, I'm going to try and avoid getting anything to the point where it's going to interfere with the hinges, so pushing it around the outside of that frame is probably a better idea. And where I've clawed that round there a bit, like cream on a scone, I'm going to actually move that away with my finger. Right, there we go, that looks a lot better. You know, less is more with PVA often. And we'll pop that in place. I'm not worried about these bits of glue around there. When I've done the whole thing, I will go through it and work it out. And I'm just having a look at these. Worth looking at these. Some of them have got flat edges, and it's obvious that they will go round the corner. In fact, almost all of them do, but I have noticed that this one doesn't. Now, I suspect most strongly that this one is going to be used there in the same way as these cover up the joints there. This is going to be used to cover up the joints here. So what I'm going to do is stick that in place along there. Now I'm a bit concerned, probably unnecessarily, to know how the roof is going to react with that. But ultimately, if I have to hack that off with a sharp blade afterwards, that ain't going to be the end of the world. And we can just get that nicely into place to get a nice clean finish there. Right, so here we go. I'm just going to go around the edges at a speed that's quite possibly remarkable. I should point out what I'm doing here is I'm overlapping it so that you don't want the stone just coming to the edge of each bit, so you've got a gap in between them. So you've got to decide, one of them leads and the other one butts up to where it goes. But that should give a nice stone effect. Okay, well, interestingly, there appears to be a spare piece of this, which is always a warning sign, but for the life of me, I cannot see where it would go. So I will just accept the fact that that is a spare piece and see what comes up later. So now I'm just going to crack on with these window frames, door frames, which should be pretty obvious in terms of where they go. Again, you can see that these windows are very cleverly done, in as much as you think, does that one fit there? And if it does, it does. But if it doesn't, you know it's wrong, because they are all very subtly and very slightly different sizes, which makes life very easy when putting things together. Okay, remember when sticking these on, actually the lintel, the thickest bit, should be at the top and the sill at the bottom should be thinner, because that is the load-bearing piece that should be up there. But actually, I prefer the look of them the other way round, so I've taken a conscious decision when I did the first one to put that at the bottom, and I think I was wrong. Let's have a look, try it the other way up. Yeah, no, I think I think doing it architecturally correctly is undoubtedly the best way now. Sometimes you've got to suck it and see, as somebody once said. No names, no pack drill. But making that decision is all about the aesthetics that you want to see. So now, here we go. We've got a thing with doors that open. And we've got all of our bits in place, all of our stonework in place, apart from the missing bit, all of our flooring in place. We can actually put that in to see how that's going to go, although I'm going to take it out because it's still drying. This one clearly could be stuck in place, or you can allow it to be removed. I think I prefer to allow it to be removed. I also found, while you weren't looking, another couple of bits that go there, and they are designed for that bit there, which is going to allow you to put somebody unpleasant with a Panzerfaust at the end of that window to fire out. So I added that in. So really we're largely complete, apart from a pile of bits and pieces. I haven't got a clue what they are. and the roof. So let's let that dry while I try and puzzle out what I'm doing next. Okie dokie, well, a few bits, a couple of door frames. Now, I've had a look around and they fit very neatly there. More architraves and frames. So I'm going to stick them on when you're not looking because that's extraordinarily tedious. Wagon wheels, this is bigger than both of us. These are going to be bits and pieces for knocking around the yard. Now that's ideal because one of the things I really want to do here is get bits and pieces knocking around the yard, but I'm not going to have them yet because I'm going to think about how I'm going to do the whole yard. This is for here, and this is going to be going over the door like that. Hopefully you can see that, which is where they're going to be able to use that to winch goods in and out. So actually what I like about this model is that there's a logic to it. You would have a door there to winch goods in and out if this was a light industrial unit. And that is perfectly possible in that, but it also gives a nice sort of visual look where you can put your machine gun team or whatever. What else have we got? Well, we've got the roof. Now the roof is very obviously in two parts. You've got the big main section and you've got the smaller secondary section. Quite obviously you can tell by this that this is going to be fitting on there. So it's an L-shaped roof, that's obvious. We've also got 2 roof strut arrangements, can't remember the name for them, should know, and 3 larger ones, which once again, obviously, big roof, little roof, and there's a section of wood here which has got notches cut in, and if you look at these frames, A-frames, you'll notice there are no notches, but if you look at the smaller A-frames, you'll notice there's a notch. Now again, working on the principle that nothing is cut for nothing, I am willing to wager that I can attach them in there, and then, oh, good Lord, we're going to see that is going to fit there. Now they'll obviously fit a bit better with glue, so I'm going to do that now. And then I'm going to let that dry. Now once again, you could be tempted to use super glue or any other glue. Don't, really don't. MDF works so much better. And you think, oh, it's got a long drying time. Go and have a cup of tea, go and have a large gin or whatever you fancy. In 20 minutes, that's going to be set to the point where you can use it. And you can already see from that that's going to fit on there. Or at least it would if I didn't pick it up and wave it about before it was dry, which in many ways is the story of my life. So we'll leave that there to dry. And then I'm going to look at these and think about how this is going to work. Now, again, we can see we've got a flat cut-off point here, whereas this point is scalloped. So clearly the cut-off point there is where that is going to make contact with the roof. Let's zoom in so we can see how that looks. Okie dokie, so here we go. Hopefully we're getting this in close up. You can see how that's going to fit there. And you can see that this one obviously is completely scalloped because this is an external wall and that's going to go very nicely there. One of the things I did notice is that we've got some spare roof tiles provided, so we can actually make something look a bit funky on there if we want. This area is certainly damaged. One of the questions I've got to ask myself is whether I tile this or not, but we shall see. So I'm going to go away and work out how these roof sections fit together, and we'll come back and look at that in a bit more detail. Okay, well we can see here that what I've done is taken the first part of the roof and just use PVA once again to stick on the 3 A-frames there, and just let that dry, just 15 minutes or so, go and do something else. And then as you can see, once that's done, I have put the second half on, nice and easy, just supported it by pushing it up against the building. So that's the main section of the roof done. Okay, well, we can see that I've glued this. I have rushed it a bit so it isn't dry, so I'm going to be careful here because I want to obviously get this video produced. Now put that there, you can see this, which is kind of almost dry. Again, you've got a notch in the end there. That is not there for a laugh, it's there for a reason. So we'll shove that end in that and see what we end up with. And as we can see, we then have a basis for our roof. And that will then allow us to make an informed decision about how we stick that on. Now, I'm going to be a bit careful here because what I don't want to do is attach this section of roof to that section of roof, because I don't think the model is actually strong enough to do that. I think we're going to have the roof made in two sections. Brush is a bit wet there, that's a bugger up. Right, clear that off because my brush had been sat in water while I was allowing stuff to dry. And we'll put that on there. That might really scupper what I'm trying to do here, but what we'll do is I will just hold this in place, do both sides, and then once it's dry, I'm going to go back and add more glue to the interior. Now, actually, having banged on about you've only got to use PVA and it's the best glue in the world, I would seriously consider here using a hot glue gun to reinforce this once this is dry. But at the moment, I'm simply trying to get that in position, which I have succeeded in doing. And that then allows us to look at the whole model. There are a couple of bits left. I've got this piece here, which is meant to be stonework of some kind, but I've no idea where. And this bit here, which looks like a spare bit of this. I think maybe it was intended to go in there, but then it was realised that this would overlap it. So I'm not too worried about that. That's basically our model. Okay, so there we go, pretty much that's a finished model. There's a number of questions I've got to ask myself. There's obviously the issue of the roof, which comes in two parts at the moment. I've got to decide whether I want to make that a one-piece roof or whether I'm going to keep it in two parts. There's also another option, which is I want to probably strengthen this. So what I might well do is get involved with putting some hot glue in there just to really bind the whole thing together. Hot glue's no good for making a building like this, but when it comes to strengthening something that is potentially a bit flimsy, just adding some of that around the seams will actually make this go a lot more rigid. The other thing I need to think about is whether I tile it or not. There's some really nice detail on this, but that doesn't mean that will be lost if I use the paper tiles from somebody like Wall Bases. So I've got to think about that. Some other decisions to be made. Well, as I say, I really want to put this on a larger base. There are some issues here. For example, I'd really like to have a bit more pavement around the outside, so I could look at extending that out. But certainly the most important thing for me is going to be to have a yard. And I think logically the entrance is going to be here, so we want some walling and then some walling all around here. I like the idea of having two gates because from a tactical point of view it means that there's a front way in and a back way in, and I think logically that this would be the main entrance and then this would be the way out. I think there would be an in and an out in a situation like this. There's all sorts of things we can do with this. I mean, this is fabulous in terms of an opportunity for having sort of advertising billboards on here, pretty much the same thing along there. So lots and lots of things I can do with this, but I think you'll agree that even looking at this like this, we've got a model that is, for MDF, incredibly three-dimensional and really, really beautifully done. It's just a case of how we go forward, and there's lots of decisions to be made there. So there we go, that's all there is for this build project for this time. We're going to be following up as soon as I've made all those key decisions. Lots of things to think about with this model in terms of taking something that's already fantastic but making it into something that looks really, really special and will be a real focal point on the tabletop. So that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching.